Hey, yo, lesson here, babe. You come at the king, you best not miss.
And even then, I probably only got a quarter of the way through the game at most. I bring this up because there are a lot of specific things I'm not going to be aware of, and so I originally took Mauler's video at face value. Since then, there have been many people pointing out some of the mistakes he made, things he missed and whatnot.
We are off to a good start. Someone who hasn't even played DS2 for more than a few hours came to the rescue for Mauler.
And recently I became aware of videos from this channel called Domo 3000. They have a series dedicated to responding to Mauler's videos and debunking them, but there are many issues I've found with some of the points being raised.
Ooh, then I'll give you a taste of it, and it will not be pleasant, I assure you.
And for some weird reason, one enemy being aggro doesn't alert others to your presence. In fact, they can get in each other's way.
A store straight sword, they pretty much just one-shot her.
Look at this!
Mauler falsely presents this as being an issue that is unique to Dark Souls 2, even though the exact same also happens in Dark Souls 1.
No, he's not presenting it as unique to Dark Souls 2, and he even says that this issue is minor. The thing with Mauler's videos that I think Domo forgets about is that it's a response to H-Bomber Guy, with the final video being a standalone critique of Dark Souls 2 specifically. So with that in mind, I'll say it once right now so I don't have to repeat it multiple times throughout my own video because I really could with how often it comes up. Domo will use the existence of something in other games in the series as part of this debunking of Mauler's points, even though said existence isn't the purpose of Mauler's video. In fact, he actively acknowledges Dark Souls 2 not being alone in some of its issues. So, Domo, Dark Souls 3 having a bad hitbox moment doesn't make Dark Souls 2's hitboxes any less shit.
The Souls games have such a fantastic handle on tight hitboxes by comparison. Dark Souls 1 offers barely any poor hitboxes by comparison to the embarrassment of Dark Souls 2, and Dark Souls 3 offers ones that are downright satisfying to watch. It is a real shame that this is yet another issue that slams against the very baseline of expectation for a game of this genre and its ability to provide an experience that is remotely balanced. The Soulsborne series is a favorite of mine. It is such a cool thing that exists. It's such a cool series of games. Dark Souls 1 for me was a masterpiece with flaws, as most masterpieces are, I suppose. There were moments where I saw cracks and letdowns in what was an incredible ride through what can only be described as a great experience. Dark Souls 2 for me was a disaster with highlights, moments where I saw a fantastic game through a bog of destructive and painful design. What I can say objectively is that with everything considered throughout my almost 10-hour series, Dark Souls 2 is a bad game. This has not changed my perspective that the game itself is poorly made, that all things considered drag it well below the threshold of something I could even recommend, though it is undeniable for a fan of the series to give it a shot, as it will answer your own questions in terms of where the series went and why people reacted the way they did. Everybody's got something to say about how Dark Souls 2 ain't that bad. Well, it is. Stop pretending it's not. There are so many problems with this game. There is a reason it's the black sheep. And despite my extremely tiny corner of the internet, I want this pendulum to swing back. If it wasn't by From and from the Dark Souls family, it would be less inclined to be defended by the fanbase, I assure you. It would also explain a hell of a lot more if it wasn't actually made by From Software. Ultimately though, you guys are welcome to enjoy it all you want. Just don't tell me the game was well designed after watching all of my videos, because it's over, I did it, it's done. But Dark Souls 2 and Bloodborne were in development at very similar times, and so people assume that the more talented members of From Software were poached for Bloodborne and left others to fill positions for the development of Dark Souls 2. So let's explore it a little bit. The creative director from Dark Souls 1 was the very same for Bloodborne, but not for Dark Souls 2. The lead programmer for Dark Souls 1 was the very same for Bloodborne, but not for Dark Souls 2. The lead graphic designer for Dark Souls 1 was the very same in Bloodborne, but not for Dark Souls 2. And to top it off, the programming staff, which arguably would be the most important section of designing the game, have quite a large amount of discrepancies. I would never use the argument that the B team clearly made Dark Souls 2 and that's why it's bad, but I would use it as an insult, because a different team clearly made the game, and I would simply say that if several of the project leaders were moved to a different project, then perhaps those who took their place weren't as prepared for the job. It's an interesting topic though, and honestly, unless From Software defines their teams as A and B, then nobody can say it objectively, though I think it's meant as a joke against the people who fill positions for the leaders who had moved to Bloodborne, which as a game is received very highly for the most part by many people. Let's open with combat. The combat is sometimes almost as good as you would expect from the Souls series, but
Mauler's video clearly tries to portray DS2 as being significantly worse than the other games in the series, so I do not see how it is a problem to point out his obvious bias. Mauler massively exaggerates issues that happen in every Souls game if they happen in DS2, and drastically downplays them or even denies their existence if they happen in the other games, as we've seen for example with the hitboxes. Yes, pointing out the fact that the hitboxes are just as bad across the series does not negate the fact that they are also bad in DS2, but it shows that DS2 haters will turn a blind eye to the exact same issues they pretend to care so much about if they happen in other Souls games.
They can't even come into this room. So like, I literally ran past them. Now they're like, Steve, what do we do now? Do we just, do we go back?
Now he makes it seem as if cheesing enemies with doors does not work in every single Soulsborne game.
The video clearly shows the fact that enemies have completely de-aggroed.
Our old mate John here hasn't even actually played DS2, so let me give some more context. When you enter this area, the first two enemies would rather stay at their post, rather than chasing you down to attack you. These door enemies will block your path, and it also takes some time until they even aggro. To me, it still looks like Mauler is relying too much on non-issues to present this game as inherently bad. If you do run past them, you usually jump into the hole to continue forward, instead of waiting here until they de-aggro. And like, what's the alternative here? Should enemies just keep running against the door? Like seriously, what is the issue with an enemy de-aggroing once they realize that they cannot get to you? Does it really feel any better if they just keep on running towards you? To me, the fact that they de-aggroed is really a complete non-issue. In a way, it is actually handled better, because it makes these enemies seem less like mindless zombies, and more like knights with a mind and purpose. In fact, they are unaffected by holy water urns, which means that they are neither undead nor hollow. They aren't just bloodthirsty zombies, but knights that are tasked with blocking this path, but they aren't getting paid to follow the bearer of the curse around. Okay, that last line was meant as a small joke, but I think you get my overall point, that I do not see how this situation is in any way inherently bad and worth to complain about. It is just a different way of handling being unable to reach the player. Sure, they could have kept on running against the door, but I do not see how this would have improved it. Now, old mate John will probably accuse me of strawmanning for this, but I'm pretty sure that Mauler would also complain if an enemy did keep on running in this situation, because we can all see that he is just looking for reasons to complain.
Despite looking like they could easily walk into the room, Mauler does not ever say that cheesing enemies with doors is a unique feature of Dark Souls 2.
The enemy is hitting his head on the doorway, which would have gotten him blocked in Demon Souls and Dark Souls 1 as well. This argument depends on the expectations that have been set up in the previous games, or even noticeable smaller enemies could get stuck in doors. To me, it's much worse if this unspoken rule of Souls gameplay is being broken. It feels really unfair if a door merely looks like it can prevent an enemy from getting through.
There's a fair bit cut out from Mauler's video where he talks generally about enemy placement. Following this is a collection of clips where Domo is sneaking behind enemies in Dark Souls 1, but the difference is that Mauler is actively running around behind enemies, and none are turning around to react to his noise. And there's one clip where an enemy is even attacked by a ballista and doesn't turn around. That's the whole point about enemies not knowing what to do unless you approach front on. Later, in Domo's clips, they actually do run, and it shows how enemies react differently when the enemy with a torch actually turns around.
Old mate John is under the false impression that Mauler is running, just because the clips are sped up. Mauler was walking, as we can see by the fact that he isn't losing any stamina. Walking in Souls games is deliberately not loud compared to running, and if you do run in DS2 it does increase the enemy's aggro range, just like it did in my DS1 clip.
But then, I wonder why Domo didn't want to show this one from Mauler's mate.
However, most of the time you'll be falling into pits regardless. This is overall not much of an issue, but it does add to the experience of moving through the world.
Let's see, where does it lead? What? What?
Maybe it's been patched, but there's no arguing here that some sort of forward push has occurred as he turns around. Torrent in Elden Ring sometimes has the same issue, and it's caused me to almost fall to my death quite a few times.
It's pretty obvious what happened here. He was trying to get closer to the edge, so he pressed forward and then immediately turned around again.
So I think Domo took a couple of instances that were maybe a couple of frames away from actually being backstabs, but it doesn't really work as a debunk to Mauler's video because his entire section regarding backstabs shows so many examples of inconsistencies.
The Grave Warden and Heide Knight here are only inconsistent if you do not know how backstabs work in every Souls game. The animations can make it look like they've turned their back to you, even though their directional vector has not changed, which I already explained in that video.
Where he's backstabbed despite being front on with an invader.
Do we really blame DS2 for a bad network connection now? That's really a reach.
Standing at an enemy's shoulder, standing directly behind an enemy and it not working, and
the Heide Knight is again the same as how it works in every Souls game. I also would not categorize this as being directly behind him. When he starts to attack, he is standing behind the left shoulder of the enemy, but not directly behind him as you were supposed to be if you want to go for a backstab. The grab area that you can see had a wider angle in DS1, so it was more accepting of user error. DS2 was just a bit more precise than it was in DS1, but giving backstabs a bit higher skill requirement does not make it an objectively bad game.
Even Domo's claims that Mauler is standing too far to one side or the legs of an enemy dictating which direction they're actually facing doesn't work given the many times Mauler shows positioning being hit and miss.
It looks like he missed that there is a short amount of time between initiating the attack and actually connecting a backstab. And I'm pretty sure that I already explained in that video that you have to think about the imaginary directional vector of the enemy, and not how his torso is twisted during an animation, like you have to do in every single Souls game.
Or the legs of an enemy dictating which direction they're actually facing.
Okay, so let me try to summarize backstabs once again. When it comes to animations shifting the torso, without affecting the backstab grab area, I really cannot see any difference between the various FromSoft games. It's just one of many non-issues that the Souls community knows that they have to play around, which of course also means that DS2 will always get called bad for having the exact same behavior, while it doesn't matter in the others. Backstabbing in DS1 was way too easy, and you could cheese most enemies by repeatedly backstabbing them, so DS2 increased the skill floor a bit, to prevent this mechanic from being way too powerful in both PvE and PvP. I do not see how the backstabs in DS2 are objectively bad, or in any way more broken than in the other Souls games. They simply do not let you cheese the game as easily.
This fundamentally is about the ability to simply hit you thanks to the extremely...
He has no agility and the attack hit his legs. As we can see, that attack has a pretty tight hitbox.
His mid-roll and the weapon physically isn't even in line with his body, despite this supposed tight hitbox.
I like how he uses a screenshot where we can literally see nothing, instead of just using slow-mo where we can see that the weapon hits his right leg.
The fact that you absolutely should.
The visible flames are larger than the hitbox, but this works in favor of the player.
The issue with the hitboxes not lining up properly with the visuals of the attack is that it causes a player to not fully understand how to approach enemies or what the full capability is of their attacks.
And I also like how he just left out my compilation of the exact same thing happening with every single dragon boss in the Souls series. Well, nearly all of them, as I forgot to show Mitter, who unsurprisingly also works the same way. 100% he would complain even if he did take damage.
This, combined with the times that you'll be hit regardless of the postcode worth of distance between you and the enemy, is what gives Dark Souls 2 its reputation of hitbox issues and why Mauler critiques it so heavily.
Did he really just make an appeal to Mauler fallacy? He watched my videos, so he should have already seen hundreds of examples of Mauler critiquing everything, including fun AI interactions like the Usain Bolt hollow or the hollows hitting the trees, heavily for no reasons. Mauler just likes to complain, even if he has to make up issues, which I also documented intensively. And I also do not understand how something that works the same in every Souls game somehow makes DS2 the worst, but of course old mate John left out this context.
And life goes on. Wow.
Here he just missed.
Yeah, no shit, mate. That's the point of this section of Mauler's video. Missed attacks that clearly shouldn't be missing. Domo does show us the hitbox of this particular weapon and the issue it has on stairs, but why not show us the actual enemy that Mauler is fighting in his clip, considering the size of it? I'd actually like to know what its hitbox looks like because Mauler is right up to it and his mace somehow misses.
First off, it does not hurt the enemy if you merely hit his cape, which again is expected behavior in the Souls series. This will be a pretty boring chapter.
Hitbox on the hilt is absolutely stupid.
In every clip you can see him getting stabbed straight through his legs.
Never mind these clips showing the players as being mid-roll and the sword passing over the top of them.
Which part of Mauler getting stabbed straight through his leg did he not understand? We can clearly see the sword going straight through his leg.
Easy contender for the worst because it happens so many times per battle.
He always dodges to the left into the attack, instead of just dodging away.
Dodging into attacks is a perfectly viable tactic, as it can keep you next to an enemy for a follow-up attack, and it can even get you away from certain hitboxes.
Did he really think that he is making a smart argument here? Dodging diagonally left or diagonally right both keep you next to the enemy for follow-up attacks. But as we see in this poor MS Paint drawing, only dodging into the attack puts you inside of the hitbox. Dodging to his unarmed side is the objectively better way of dodging. Similarly, you should not roll along with horizontal attacks, as that will also maximize the amount of time you spend inside of the attack.
Imagine a player trying to figure out what's going on in a game notorious for hitbox issues, not being slapped on one of the thrusts, but then being slapped on the second one with next to no discernible visual difference between the two attacks.
One of the good things about video games is that they aren't just static images. It's really not hard to tell the difference between a running attack and the end of a combo.
That's not a mechanic, that's more like visual.
Well, it's a performance thing.
I'm having a fucking race with this zombie.
He also seems to think that fun interactions with enemies are bad for some reason.
No, he doesn't say fun interactions are bad. He's clearly just laughing at how ridiculous it looks to see a zombie speed up and start racing alongside him.
Yes, Mahler did not outright state that fun AI interactions are bad, but he did label several of them as bugs, including the bathing ogre you can see in the preview window here. No one would use the man-serpents running past you in the Duke's archives as evidence that DS1 is a bad game, but that's exactly what Mahler is constantly doing to DS2. This isn't even the only hollow that runs away in this area, and Mahler claims that he finished the game several times, so there is no excuse for him to present this as a bug. Everyone that actually played DS2 recognizes just how disingenuous Mahler is. Our old mate John here hasn't even actually played DS2, so it is easy for Mahler to deceive him. Anyone that played DS2 knows just how many interesting AI interactions there are, starting with the curious kobolds at the very beginning of the game. This is the game teaching you that not everything that looks like an enemy is a bloodthirsty hollow that you have to fear and fight. DS2 has a lot of unique AI that just make the world feel so much more alive, so it really is a shame that Mahler just presents those as bugs. Some other examples are Heide Knights that are initially passive, but that's like the least interesting one. The honorful Dragon Knights at the Dragon Shrine are one of the most well-known examples. If you engage in the duels against the Drake Keepers, they will respect you and grant you passage. But if you disrespect the duels, they will chase you down. And let us not forget our good friend, the torch-carrying hollow. We all love him for bringing light into our world. Isn't he just cute how he just follows us around? Or the hollow soldiers that are still attacking the corpses of the giants. No one would present those as being bugged, right?
He's attacking the What the?
And of course Mahler did.
Trying to manufacture the argument that Mahler is ignoring cheese stats is disingenuous. Ignoring the plethora of clips he uses to showcase some outright awful pathing issues that go beyond the usual method of cheesing enemies near ledges is an interesting thing to not include or address.
I did address it by showing several minutes of the same things happening in the other Souls games in order to point out that I do not see how it is any worse in DS2. But the clip our old mate John showed to display awful pathing issues once again shows just how easy it is for Mahler to deceive people that haven't actually played DS2 by leaving out the context that this is actually an interesting and unique AI interaction. This enemy is using a ring to appear as a summon, but he is actually a troll invader NPC that wants to jump down here to lure you into a dangerous situation. If you just blindly trust Mahler, it surely does look like a severe pathing issue, but that's only because he deliberately does not mention what is actually happening here. This is really one of the most memorable AI invaders, so it's really a shame that someone would use it as an example of awful pathing issues.
Embarrassingly, this can happen with bosses too.
He is acting as if getting bosses stuck has not been a cheese tactic since Flame Lurker.
No, that is not what Mahler is saying here. This is the boss AI bugging out and refusing to do anything other than be stuck. Domo even admits to being unable to recreate the issue and that this boss in particular can apparently jump to the side, which she doesn't do in Mahler's video, hence the point talking about bosses being able to have their AI break.
It's still pretty disingenuous to use this as evidence that DS2 was the worst Souls game, when it happens with so many bosses in the Souls series, and still happens in Elden Ring. Even the final boss of DS1 has this exact same issue. He could jump out of here, but he prefers to just run into the wall. This has worked in the original release, and still works in the remastered version. Pull out a bow and you've got yourself an easy win. DS2 isn't even the worst offender when it comes to this issue, so this is just more evidence that Mahler likes to use things that happen in every FromSoft game as evidence that DS2 was the worst of them. Wow, he made it out after 5 minutes. How was that attack poorly telegraphed, especially after you've seen it once?
Because if you're moving around and even get behind the enemy like Mahler's mate does in the clip, you're likely not going to notice the very subtle movement of the arm raising, and questions will naturally arise when other AI-related bugs are happening.
I'm pretty sure that I mentioned more than just the sword slowly raising in the very next sentence, like the fact that they stop dead in their tracks. They stop walking, hold their head down, and slowly raise their weapon. You are supposed to just get out of the range of the attack they are charging.
I'm sure there's a few other things Domo gets wrong, but the main point I want to make is that challenging someone else is a good thing, but it's important to do it properly and not twist things to suit yourself or misrepresent someone else's words. That's a good way to have people completely disregard your own points. I don't know if Domo is doing it deliberately or not, but it's very noticeable when they get things wrong.